8:30 a.m., Turkana, Africa. I was at the drought-tolerant seed distribution camp, checking the household list and the water distribution schedule when the satellite phone rang. This morning, Mason is about to have his own house. Your dad and I sold Prairie Ridge Farm. Got a great price, my mother, Linda, said quickly, as if announcing good news. I kept my voice in check. What did you sell? My father cut in. Family helps family, you're away working. I answered bluntly. Helping still requires asking me, do you know that signing on my behalf is illegal? The line went silent for a few seconds. Then Linda hedged. Don't be so tense. That farm just sitting there is such a waste. I looked at the line of people waiting for seed, ended the call, and opened my work notebook. Once I finished the seed distribution, I would fly back to Des Moines. I quickly noted the Kenya requirements for my colleagues, areas receiving seed, the training schedule, the number of households to add. Then I called Kelsey Ward, an attorney in Des Moines. Prepare filings for an emergency temporary order to halt the transaction, file a dispute notice with the county, and send notice to the bank holding the mortgage, I said, item by item. Kelsey asked, do you have financial evidence supporting your interest? I opened my archive folder and attached the payments. I sent Kelsey 4 years of statements: property taxes, crop insurance, John Deere maintenance fees, and labor for irrigation system upkeep. All were paid from accounts in my name. I included a summary table of dates, amounts, payees, and photos of receipts. Next, I emailed Amira Khan, my personal banking advisor. I need 36 months of statements for all accounts related to Prairie Ridge Farm, including transfers among family members and confirmation of the approval chain. Please temporarily lock any unusual transactions. I put the phone down, completed the round inspecting the seed warehouse, and signed handover to the local team. As the pickup truck took me to the makeshift airstrip, I texted Kelsey my estimated landing time. My objective was very clear. Shut off the money spigot, flip on the data switch, and bring the farm back to where it belongs before anyone has time to tidy the books. The plane landed in Des Moines in the late afternoon. I texted Kelsey that I'd arrived, then opened my to-do list for the next day. Instead of running straight to the notary's office or the recorder to argue, I decided to start by requesting records. If others wanted to explain, I wanted to see the paperwork first. The next morning, I sat at Kelsey's desk, opened my laptop, and wrote the first email to the Black Hawk County clerk. The subject line was clear, the content concise. I request scans of the transaction ledgers for the past 6 months, the access log for parcel file 14223, and the specimen signatures of the notaries working the night of the 10th into the morning of the 11th. Kelsey glanced over it and nodded. Add a line asking them to confirm response timelines and fees, she said. I added a paragraph. Please indicate reproduction fees, how to receive the records electronically, and the internal file number for tracking. After hitting send, we called the office directly to get a confirmation number. The operator read back the request, issued a code, and promised to provide an estimated delivery date within 7 to 10 business days. Kelsey reminded me to open a tracking sheet, columns for where it was sent, type of record, date sent, point of contact, response deadline, and notes. I added a Preserve Originals column to flag where we needed a data preservation letter. No deletion, no overwriting. Kelsey said, we build an audit trail. Who entered the system? When? From which address? No need to raise your voice. We need timestamps. I wrote that sentence verbatim at the top of the sheet. Next to it, I added a secondary list: recording office, e-recording archive, notary office, and the state's Office of External Affairs to verify notary licensing information. The next step was notary verification. I used the state hotline and entered the notary license number based on the name that appeared in the summary record the bank had sent me the week before. The state staff confirmed the license was active and emailed the notary's signature specimens on file from issuance and renewal. They also sent instructions for requesting extracts from the notary journal, if the notary still keeps a paper journal as required. I immediately sent a separate request to the notary listed in the transaction. The request was simple. Please provide a copy of the notary journal page for the night of the 10th into the morning of the 11th, including any entry for the name Avery Cole, if present, time of signing, document type, and copies of the ID you reviewed. I chose certified mail to have proof of delivery. At midday, my voicemail had a new message. A man's voice identifying himself as the notary on record spoke slowly and firmly. I did not meet anyone named Avery Cole that night. The signature specimen I see in the scan does not match my file specimen. I will respond formally, by letter. I forwarded the audio file to Kelsey immediately, noted the time, the incoming number, and saved a copy. Kelsey said, "Enough for preservation. We need it in writing, but this voicemail clarifies our direction." In parallel, I sent another request to the county recording office. Please provide the electronic processing chain for the transfer instrument related to parcel 14-223. Time received, who entered it, software used to record, IP address used to access, and the file version prior to sealing. The county staff replied they would coordinate with the system vendor to extract the logs. I asked them to add a Do Not Cure flag to the record so no one could amend or withdraw the document during the dispute. They confirmed the flag had been set and included a confirmation email. I called the Land Records office to request the parcel map and parcel number history for the past 10 years. The staffer immediately sent a download link, along with a table listing each survey and boundary change. I saved it into the Prairie Ridge Maps folder and marked updates that overlapped with the suspected transaction timeline. For each file, I downloaded the PDF and kept the system file name unchanged to preserve original date, time, metadata. In the afternoon, Kelsey suggested broadening the scope by sending a request to the title insurance company. We called the claims department, reported an active dispute, and asked them to open a hold for a potential claim if the transaction is voided. They asked for the policy number and the name of the intermediary company. I provided the number from the title insurance premium statement I'd saved. They confirmed they would annotate pending dispute and await supplemental documents. I added this event to the tracker. I sent a request to the mortgage holding bank. Please provide the communication history related to the transfer of Prairie Ridge in the past 6 months, including emails, letters, and call logs, with anyone representing my family. I attached the bank's authorization form. The legal department said they would respond within the statutory timeframe and temporarily placed a block on all change requests for this loan until a court order or a jointly signed agreement by the parties is provided. To close off another avenue, I requested retention of entry TOS exit logs for the administrative building the night of the 10th and early morning of the 11th. The county security unit accepted the preservation request, noted the camera retention period, and said they would require a court order or a formal request from an investigative agency to release copies. Kelsey nodded. "We don't need the video yet. We just need it kept." I marked this item data preserved, awaiting order. During the day, I also contacted the local post office to confirm whether anyone had submitted a change of address related to Prairie Ridge. Staff said they could not provide details without proper paperwork, but they noted the account with a warning that any new forwarding request would require additional verification. I asked them to send official instructions so Kelsey could prepare the accompanying documents. Late afternoon, the Black Hawk County clerk replied to the morning email. They confirmed they would provide scans of 6 months of transaction ledgers, the parcel file access log, and the notary signature specimens. They included per-page fees and instructions for online payment. I paid immediately, sent the receipt, and received an email that processing had begun. The email contained one more useful detail. The transfer instrument for parcel 14-223 was submitted via the electronic system, batch number, at 23:42 on the 10th. I took a screenshot and forwarded it to Kelsey. She jotted into her notebook, "Electronic submission near midnight. Verify after hours operating rules and submitter access rights." We opened another request to the e-recording platform vendor, asking for technical logs, submitter account, IP address, login time, upload time, and any system alerts. The vendor required a letter from the county authority. Kelsey drafted a short coordination letter, attaching the county file code and a request to preserve original data. While waiting, I called the notary back at the number he left in the voicemail. He was brief. "I did not notarize that night. I have compared my signature specimen with the one in the county file. They do not match. I will send a letter confirming I did not meet anyone named Avery Cole." I asked whether he kept a notary journal recording that day's acts. He answered, "Yes, and there is no entry for you." I thanked him and reminded him to send it by certified mail. After the call, I sent Kelsey a memo with the time noted. By day's end, we received an email from the county clerk's office with a partial data release, the access list for parcel file 14-223, including timestamps, internal account names, and network addresses. I dropped the file into the folder and opened it to reconcile with the 2342 mark. There were two system accesses by employee account A at 2335 and 2358, plus one access by an external submitter account at 2341. I highlighted these three timestamps in red. Kelsey said, "Tomorrow, request identification of the external submitter account, registered person, workplace address, and license if they're a notary or agent." I added it to the next day task list. To complete the picture, I sent another request to the county assessor's office. "Please provide the ownership change history, dates of tax data updates related to Prairie Ridge, and any notices sent to the owner's address in the past 3 months." The assessor responded quickly, confirming they would send a digital copy within 2 days. I also sent a request to the local utilities to confirm whether any service name changes or new service activations were made at the farm address during the week of the transaction. They required legal paperwork. I forwarded the details to Kelsey to attach to the court order once obtained. Before leaving the office, I printed all requests sent and responses received, filing them by topic: recording, notary, system access, bank, title insurance, building security, tax assessment, utilities. Each folder had a cover sheet indicating status: sent, pending, partial received, or court order required. I stuck a large sheet on the main binder. Objective: reconstruct the path of the document from creation to recording. Kelsey read through and said, "No need for noise. We need timestamps." I replied, "In farm work, if you don't measure, you don't conclude. In legal work, if there's no log, you don't call it credible." That night, once home, I reopened the master file and added a questionable nodes column to flag items needing a second inquiry. I wrote a summary email to Kelsey. "We have the 2342 submission time confirmed, access logs received, the notary's voicemail denying involvement, camera data preserved, and holds placed at the bank and the title insurer. Tomorrow, verify the external submitter account, obtain the relevant notary journal page, and request a full technical report from the e-recording vendor." I shut the computer down near midnight. There was plenty left for tomorrow, but the framework was clear. Instead of arguing with words, I would follow the paper. Once there are enough timestamps, the document's path will reveal itself. After locking down the document chain and requesting data preservation at the county, I moved on to the money. I needed a clear answer. If I cut off the funds I've quietly pumped into the farm over the past 4 years, how long would the cash flow hold up? I called Amira Khan, the private banker in charge of the family accounts. We met in a small conference room with frosted glass and a whiteboard behind us. I was brief. Run a 30-day liquidity stress test for Prairie Ridge. Separate out all mandatory expenses, property taxes, crop insurance, irrigation water fees, principal and interest on equipment, and wages for the coming season. Add a reserve for fuel, minor repairs, and emergency costs. On the income side, count only contracted, guaranteed revenue with the elevator, and existing agreements. Amira took quick notes, confirmed scope, then asked for access to the files I had saved. 4 years of tax returns, crop insurance policies, the John Deere equipment amortization schedules, the irrigation rate sheets, the corn and soybean sale contracts with the elevator, and the payroll schedule for the upcoming season. I signed an authorization, enabled two-factor access for the bank's analytics team, and sent over a summary of the items I've paid on the family's behalf: property taxes, insurance, maintenance, and irrigation fees. The goal is simple, I said. If you remove my funding stream, how long does the operating cash last? Early afternoon, Amira called back. I need to confirm 2 more items: the short-term balance with the farm supply store and the business card outstanding. I dug through my files and sent statements from 2 fertilizer and seed suppliers, plus payment schedules. I also sent photos of the water tariff per unit and the pipeline surcharge during drought. Amira said, "That's enough. My team and I will run the report today." I went back to Kelsey's office to review the legal track while waiting for the stress test. 3 hours later, Amira emailed a file titled 30-Day Liquidity Stress Test, Prairie Ridge. We met on video. The screen showed 4 sections: guaranteed cash inflows over 30 days, mandatory outflows over 30 days, debt maturities coming due, and the forecast if my injections stop. The figures were clear. Guaranteed revenue in the next 30 days consists of the first installment from the elevator for delivered corn, plus a small equipment insurance refund. Outflows include this month's property taxes, crop insurance premium due, last month's irrigation bill, the interest payments on the tractor and combine, dunning charges from the fertilizer store, and wage advances for 2 seasonal workers. Result: if the payments I've covered regularly for 4 years are removed, the operating account goes negative on day 12. After that, any buying a house for Mason plan fails internal bank underwriting for minimum liquidity and debt covenant compliance. I asked Amira to generate a 1-page, 5-line summary for internal discussions with exact metrics and timing. She sent it immediately. 1. Guaranteed 30-day revenue covers only 62% of mandatory outflows. 2. Property tax plus crop insurance account for 41% of 30-day outflows. 3. Equipment debt schedule. 2 installments due within 14 days. No reserve fund. 4. Irrigation and operating fees make up 19% of outflows. Cannot be deferred more than 7 days if flow rates are to be maintained. 5. Without the supplemental stream I've paid for 4 years, the operating account goes negative on day 12. Debt covenants are breached and withdrawals are restricted by the bank. I read each line carefully and check the attachments: cash flow table, debt maturity calendar, irrigation contract, and photos of receipts for the items I've paid. I texted Amira. Temporarily lock auto transfers from my account to the farm operating account. Flag any unusual transactions related to Prairie Ridge. Notify me immediately of any large withdrawal request. Amira confirmed alerts were active and placed a risk tag on the loan file for credit monitoring. If they request additional draws, we'll ask for a cash plan, she said. That evening, I started a group call with my parents and Mason. I sent the 5-line summary in advance. Frank, my father, opened. Family will figure it out. I answered plainly. Land doesn't figure it out. Land has to be calculated. This is a bank report, not my opinion. Linda said, "You need to think of your brother. His housing is the priority." I kept my voice even. Housing is a personal priority, but land is a shared asset with debt and obligations. The bank will not accept a home purchase plan when the farm account goes negative in 12 days. Mason jumped in. "I'll pick up extra shifts." I asked, "Do you have a 30-day cash plan? This table shows 2 equipment payments due in 14 days. The irrigation bill is due next week. This property tax installment must be paid." Everyone fell silent for a few seconds. I continued, "I'm not refusing to help, but help has to follow the numbers, not feelings." I moved to actions. 1. Send the stress test to Kelsey to include in the emergency injunction application as evidence that a sale now risks breaching bank obligations. 2. Ask Amira to attach the bank's minimum liquidity underwriting appendix for primary residence mortgages to compare directly with Mason's home plan. 3. Lock in with the elevator for an earlier payment schedule on freight already received if possible, in exchange for a commitment to deliver the balance once the dispute is resolved. 4. Email the irrigation company to request up to a 7-day grace period, with proof of legal dispute attached, to avoid water shutoff. The next morning, Amira sent another file. Underwriting checklist, primary residence. It listed requirements: debt-to-income ratio, 90-day net cash flow, valid source of down payment, and confirmation that disputed assets are not being used to service the loan. I forwarded it to the family with one line: "The home purchase plan does not qualify unless there is new income and the dispute is resolved." Frank texted back, "Banks always make it hard." I replied, "The bank is doing its job. Without a cash flow table, they won't approve." For a final check, I called the farm accountant who has kept our books. He confirmed that the payments I've made over 4 years are currently classified as personal support. I asked him to update the classification to temporary capital contribution and add a schedule for potential reimbursement. "We need this to reflect the cash flow accurately," I said. He agreed and sent a draft updated report that day. I also called the 2 supply stores to confirm balances and payment dates. Both said they could extend by a week if there's a lawyer's letter confirming an active dispute. At noon, I sent the stress test summary to the chairman of the cooperative where the family buys seed. "If needed, we can allow partial deferred payment on the current order," he replied. "But there must be a clear 30-day collection plan." I thanked him and noted in the tracker. Plan B. Defer 25% of seed order. No impact on planting if dispute is resolved within 2 weeks. By afternoon, Kelsey assembled everything: the 30-day stress test, the mortgage underwriting appendix, the equipment maturity confirmations, and the elevator's email. She put them under irreparable harm in the motion to stay the transfer. "The court will ask why it must stop immediately," Kelsey said. "We'll explain that if the transfer proceeds, the farm will breach debt covenants within 2 weeks. The resulting harm can't be fixed with simple damages." That evening, I called the family again. I read the 5-line summary one more time, slowly and clearly. Frank said, "I'll talk to your mother and Mason." I replied, "I'll send a 30-day operating schedule for the farm. My part is to stop automatic payments and instead route funds through an escrow account controlled by counsel, disbursed only against valid invoices with dual signatures. If you agree, we'll sign a temporary agreement to carry the farm through the debt dates." Linda asked, "Is it really necessary to make it this strict?" I kept my voice even. "It's not strict. It's controlled spending during a dispute." Before shutting down, I wrote myself a note. The season isn't on the internet, it's on the balance sheet. I set the next day's plan. Meet the bank to confirm suspension of auto debits, work with the elevator on the interim schedule, call the irrigation company to lock the grace period, and sign the escrow agreement if the family agrees. I also booked a quick meeting with the co-op advisor to map a first-week cost reduction option if needed. That night, I reviewed the entire chain so far: request records at the county, preserve data, build logs, then move to the money and run the liquidity test. Each step had a timestamp, an owner, and supporting documents. Tomorrow morning, I'll submit the report with Kelsey's motion. If I have to speak in court, I'll need only the 5-line summary, the detailed tables, and one short answer. Without supplemental funding, the account goes negative after 12 days. The home purchase plan fails underwriting. The transfer must be stayed to protect the asset and the debt obligations. The family may not like it, but the bank will understand. And once the bank understands, the rest will fall into the proper order. After a day working with the bank and the lawyer, I didn't post anything online. On Wednesday night, I drove to the Grange Hall out in the suburbs, the county's farmers' meeting place, where there's coffee ready every evening, halved donuts, and a sign-in sheet set on the wooden table by the door. I wrote Avery Cole, checked head of household in the notes column, pinned the name tag to my denim jacket, and went in. The meeting room had a low vaulted ceiling, metal folding chairs, and a wooden table microphone. The chair was Mr. Ray Henderson, president of the county grain co-op. He struck the gavel, asked everyone to stand for the pledge, then read the agenda. Co-op announcements, an update from the extension office, and a new item: a reminder of the rules for inheritance and ownership consent in farm families. The secretary, Miss Fiefy, Marla, sat beside him, opened a laptop to take the minutes. No specific case was named. The aim was to restate the rules so every household would do things properly and avoid legal trouble. The first part went as usual: corn prices, soybean prices, rain forecasts, the scale house opening schedule, the silos closing hours over the weekend, and a notice about maintenance on farm roads. The representative from the State County Extension Office reminded everyone of the class on efficient irrigation and the nozzle replacement support program. Then, Mr. Ray moved on to the inheritance and ownership consent item. He read aloud each line of the best practice rules posted on the board. When property is titled to an individual or held jointly, any transfer, mortgage, or change to mailing information must bear the signatures of the named parties. Notarization requires an in-person meeting, inspection of original identification, entry in the notary journal, and retention of a copy. Any changes involving the bank, insurance, tax authorities, or the Land Records Office must be in writing from the named party or a lawfully authorized agent. If there is a dispute within the family, contact the county clerk's office to place a dispute pending note on the parcel record until the court reviews the matter. He paused and said clearly, "This isn't just the law. This is how we live alongside each other without making life hard for one another." The secretary typed quickly under the standards section of the minutes. An older farmer raised his hand, was invited to the microphone, and spoke slowly. "Here, a signature is a pledge." The room fell silent, heads nodding. I stood and asked to add one line, "and a pledge cannot be borrowed." Ms. Marla entered both sentences into the minutes under public comments. The public comment period opened. Mrs. Nancy Duffy, who lives at the head of the road leading into Prairie Ridge, came up. She put her phone on the table and opened a photo with date and time. "Last Monday, 5:12 p.m., I saw an unfamiliar SUV parked right at the records shed," she said. "A man went inside for more than 10 minutes and then left. I recorded the license plate because there have been tool thefts lately." The secretary asked for the plate number, took a photo of it, and said that after the meeting she'd have Mrs. Duffy sign a citizen note to forward to the sheriff's office if they needed to check. No one asked the man's identity. No one jumped to conclusions. Everything was put into process, logged, time-stamped, ready to provide if the authorities requested. Next was Earl Patterson, who owns the machine shop and is the John Deere service dealer in town. He brought printed repair orders, clipped with a plastic cover. I confirmed that all the work orders for Prairie Ridge over the past 4 years were signed by Avery Cole, he said, turning page by page to show dates, machine numbers, work items, and signatures. He set aside a copy in case the co-op wanted to keep it for reference. The chair thanked him and asked him to email a PDF to the secretary for the Community Data Archive. Earl nodded. "I'll send it in the morning." This is the kind of verification rural Americans value. Papers, dates, signatures, machine numbers. A representative from the farm credit system came up to note a practical point. If a family plans to buy a home for another member using funds from the farm, the bank will review cash flow and check for ownership disputes. We only disburse when we have written consent from all named parties. No substitute signatures accepted. He handed out a flyer. Checklist for major changes in farm families, with steps. Discuss within the family, seek legal counsel, notify the co-op to get the proper forms, and contact the county clerk to place a dispute note if needed. The local post office representative also stood to say, "To change the farm's mailing address, you must file the official form with confirmation from the named party. If anyone suspects an unauthorized change, come to the post office to file an alert note. We'll call to verify before processing." The guidance section was led by the chair. The co-op would create a free 30-minute advisory group for families considering a transfer, composed of a retired attorney, an agricultural tax accountant, and a household head who had navigated a smooth succession. Mr. Ray asked, "All in favor?" The whole room said, "Aye." He struck the gavel. Approved. The advisory group's duty schedule was posted on the notice board and on the co-op's website. I took a photo to send to Attorney Kelsey because courts often put weight on community documents with procedures and collective signatures. When it came to households wishing to share, I stood. Prairie Ridge is petitioning the court for an order to halt the transaction while records are reviewed, I said briefly. For 4 years, I've paid the property taxes, crop insurance, and equipment maintenance. I've requested from the county office the access logs, the notary's signature specimen, and the electronic submission processing chain. The bank has run a 30-day liquidity stress test. If the stream I've been paying is cut off, the account goes negative after 12 days. I will follow the legal process. If anyone who has worked with Prairie Ridge needs anything confirmed, I'll reach out individually. I didn't name my relatives. I didn't argue. I let the numbers and the process stand. The chair recorded, reported in the minutes. A farmer in the middle rows offered a suggestion. If any household is planning a transfer, don't wait until right before the season to speak up. Bring it to the advisory group or call the county clerk early. That way, a dispute note can be placed in time, if needed. The secretary added a line to the minutes. Recommendation: early notification prior to seasonal milestones. The extension representative added, if a farm manager is changed mid-season, contact us to update the irrigation plan and maintenance schedule. Avoid interruptions. At the end, Mr. Ray read the resolutions. 1. Reaffirm the standards of ownership consent and in-person notarization. 2. Establish the free advisory group. 3. Recommend that originals be stored in a locked location and a list kept of key holders. 4. Recommend early notice of major changes. 5. Record 2 community items from tonight. Mrs. Duffy's observation of an unfamiliar vehicle at the records shed, and Mr. Earle's confirmation of repair orders signed by Avery. He asked if there were objections. None. He struck the gavel. Adjourned. People lined up to sign out. Those who needed flyers took extras. Ms. Marla asked me to meet her at the table to hand me a provisional printout of the minutes with the chair's signature. The original would be kept at the co-op office and posted on the bulletin board the next day. I stopped at the table. Mrs. Duffy handed me the written plate number again so I could take a photo. She agreed to sign a short statement if the sheriff's office reached out. Earl asked for my email to send the PDF files of the work orders. He added, "If you need someone to testify, I'll go." I thanked him and said I'd forward everything to the lawyer to keep the procedures proper. The chair shook my hand and said, "If you need a certification letter for the standards we read tonight, the co-op will sign and stamp it. Just send the request." I nodded and asked them to email the scan in the morning. On the way home, I updated my tracker. Added, Grange Hall minutes, provisional copy received. Mrs. Duffy's license plate photo, captured. Earl's work orders, awaiting PDF. I texted Kelsey. "We have community minutes and 2 witnesses ready to confirm. I'll send you the files in the morning." She replied, "Very good. Courts value community recorded signed documents. Remember to request a stamped copy." I also messaged Amira. Add a note. Operating habits over the last 4 years show I signed for service to reflect who's actually responsible for the equipment. She replied, updated. When I got home, Earl's email had arrived. 4 PDFs, each file named with the service date, each containing the repair order, the machine number, my signature, the amount, and the payment date. I saved them to the Equipment Prairie Ridge folder and logged each item in the tracker. Another email was the provisional co-op minutes, signed by Mr. Ray and Ms. Marla. I printed a copy to submit to Kelsey in the morning. My phone buzzed. Mrs. Duffy texted, "Date, time I saw the vehicle, Monday, 5:12 p.m. I'll keep the photo on my phone as is." I thanked her and said I'd get in touch if the sheriff's office requested it. The meeting didn't name anyone in my family, nor did it turn into an argument. But the standards were restated clearly in the way the Midwestern U.S. has always done it. Notice, minutes, vote, signatures. Here, a signature is a pledge, and a pledge cannot be borrowed. Those 2 simple lines will go with tomorrow's file, alongside the access logs, the notary's signature specimen, the bank report, and the cash flow stress test. All set side by side in the proper format, with the proper dates and times. The rest is for the court and the county offices to handle. In the morning in Des Moines, I finished printing the Grange Hall minutes. In the afternoon, I received an additional confirmation email from the county. In the evening at home, I reopened my Turkana notebook. I wanted to remind myself why everything has to be done in the right order. In Kenya, I wrote out every line very clearly so the local team could execute easily the next day. In Iowa, I also need such a notebook for the family. The field log in Turkana has fixed sections, number of households coming to receive drought-tolerant seed, soil conditions, water volume, and the training schedule. I wrote, "This morning 120 households, children accompanying adults, lined up by group. The person in charge handed out each packet, instructed on sparse sowing and using a thin layer of straw to retain moisture after watering." I went through each area and asked the same 3 questions. How many people are in the household? Where is the nearest water source? What is the plan for next week? The answers are simple, but need to be recorded so they're not forgotten. At noon, I called back to Iowa and listened to my mother talk about Mason wanting to look at a house outside town. I looked at the note, water conservation, then thought of the house money, property taxes, and the equipment debt. I wrote in the notebook, Mason can have his own house if there's real cash flow. The farm will only remain sound if decisions follow procedure. I spoke softly to myself in the voice memo. No retaliation, only illuminate with process. Every step must have paperwork. Every word must be accompanied by a piece of evidence. I listened back to my own voice, steady and brief. Then I opened the Notes app and made a list called Boundary Toolkit. I don't want to rely solely on the court. I want an intermediate step so everyone in the house can clearly see whether we are aligned or not. I drafted a one-page document and titled it Family Covenant. I wrote slowly, using short sentences, removing all vague wording. The goal is to create a civil agreement within the household. If signed, it is binding by signature. If not signed, the document becomes a mirror showing true intent. I began with a line identifying the parties. Prairie Star Ag in Iowa is the sole owner of Prairie Ridge. Everyone in the family respects this. I moved on to the asset decision clause. All decisions related to the land, equipment, and money of the farm must bear the signature of the person named in the records. No verbal proxies. No signing on someone else's behalf. I added a transparent cash flow schedule. Each month publish the income to expense sheet, debts due, invoices paid. Those who contribute money have the right to view the books. The next clause is a commitment against impersonation. Do not use someone else's name. Do not file address changes. Do not sign bank papers. Do not request transfers without a lawful power of attorney. I close the sanctions section. If any of the items are violated, all forms of support from me will cease. Support already provided will be placed into an escrow account held by an attorney and only disbursed for mandatory costs according to proper invoices. I sent the draft to Kelsey for wording review, reminding her to keep a civil tone and not to use terms that create tension. She returned it with a few minor edits, changed commitment to clause, add blanks for date, place of signing, and witness. I printed 3 copies and placed each into a thin folder. I arranged to meet my parents and Mason at the kitchen table, inviting no one else. I placed the agreement on the table and set the pen in the middle. I said, "This is not court paperwork. This is an in-house agreement. If we sign, we have a clear working framework. If we don't sign, I will understand and I will move on to the next step." My father glanced over it and, before reading carefully, said, "Within the family, signing this feels distant." I slid the agreement back toward him. Signed to be closer. Closer through structured trust. When there is structure, there's less arguing. My mother flipped through it slowly. She stopped at the line, "No impersonation." She said, "I understand your intention, but I'm afraid Mason will feel suspected." I replied, "If he hasn't done anything wrong, his signature all the more proves the good." Mason sat still, looking down at the table. I didn't press. I stated the deadline clearly. "I'll give it 3 days. If by 5 p.m. on the 3rd day there's no signature, I will use the law. I am still your daughter. But the farm is an asset that needs procedure." That night I received a text from my mother. "Let me think about it." My father didn't respond. Mason sent a fist bump emoji. I didn't try to guess. I opened my work notebook and wrote, Day 1, present the agreement. Day 2, gentle reminder. Day 3, finalize. I set alarms for each milestone. On day 2, I texted my mother, checking on the status of the agreement. She wrote back, "Your father wants to talk, doesn't want to sign." I called immediately. My father said, "I'm afraid if I sign, it'll be awkward later. Family is family." I replied, "Family needs 2 things, affection and a framework. Without a framework, affection gets dragged along by bad actions. You want to shelter Mason?" I understand. But protecting the family isn't done by ignoring principles. My mother interjected. Signing papers feels like strangers. I kept my tone steady. If we don't sign this, we go back to vagueness. And vagueness leads to mistakes. I've supported us for 4 years. I can't continue if everything has no signature. My father was silent for a moment, then said, "Let me talk to Mason." While waiting, I prepared the next step. I drafted a voicemail to be sent to all if I didn't receive signatures by the deadline. I wrote it out and read it twice so the tone would be clear and steady. This is Avery. Today at 5 p.m. Iowa time is the deadline to sign the in-house agreement. If there is no genuine signature by then, I will proceed down the full legal path. This is to protect the farm, protect the obligations to the bank, and protect each person from larger risks. I'm not cutting off contact, I'm only changing the method. I saved the audio file and named it Voicemail 5 p.m. On day 3, I sent a short message at 10 a.m. Reminder, signing deadline 5 p.m. My mother replied, "I'm not ready." My father texted, "I won't sign this." Mason didn't respond. I put the phone down and went outside to check the pickup. I went to buy more printer ink and folders. I came back, printed 3 more copies of the agreement, clipped them into folders in case anyone changed their mind at the last minute. At 4 p.m., I called my mother. "Do you have any questions about the content?" She said, "No, I won't sign. I'm afraid it will push the family further apart." I replied, "Keeping distance from what's wrong brings the family closer to what's right." My father sighed. I concluded, "I will send the voicemail at 5 p.m. as I said." At exactly 5 p.m., I opened the app, sent the voicemail to all 3. I listened back on speaker to make sure the content was correct. I didn't add a single word beyond what I'd written. I set the phone down, opened my computer, and emailed Kelsey. No signatures. Moving to the legal step as planned. Attached are the agreement presented, the reminder proof, and the recorded notice of the deadline. She replied, "All received. Tomorrow we'll file for a temporary restraining order and an updated dispute notice. I'll add a section for attempted in-house mediation." That night, I wrote in the Turkana log, the number of households completing training, notes on how to retain moisture with straw, and the line, "In Iowa, the lesson is to maintain boundaries in writing." I listened again to the recording, reminding myself, no retaliation, only illuminate with process. I bullet-pointed what I had done, requested county records, sought data preservation, built the access log, stress-tested cash flow, held a community meeting, proposed an in-house agreement. I didn't let myself get drawn into arguing with personal stories. I kept an even pace. Ask, receive, file, present. The next morning, I received 2 messages, one from my mother. "I'm sad this has turned into paperwork, but I hear you." One from Mason. "I'm sorry, I want a house, but I don't want to lose the farm." I replied to both. "I'm ready to sit down anytime to discuss helping Mason according to the proper process. But to help, we need signatures on paper, not promises over the phone." I proposed a meeting at the lawyer's office with a witness present, so that whatever anyone said would be recorded correctly. By noon, Kelsey sent the court calendar for the coming week. She included a list of documents to bring, the stamped Grange Hall minutes, the cash flow stress test report, letters from key farm customers, if any, and the unsigned in-house agreement. She texted, "Judges often ask, 'What steps did you try before coming to court?' We have enough." I nodded, checked off my to-do list, and added the items, pick up the official minutes from the co-op, and print the mechanic's confirmation letter. In the afternoon, I got a call from my mother. She said, "I want to understand exactly what a dispute notice is." I explained, It's a note submitted to the county office so that anyone pulling the record can see the land is under dispute. It can't be sold or transferred until the matter is resolved. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "I understand. I need time." I replied, "I'm still here, but old habits must stop. Every decision must have a signature." The day ended cleanly. I didn't feel relieved. I felt that the next tasks were clear. Tomorrow, I will file with Kelsey. Before turning off the lights, I reopened the Turkana notebook and read a few lines about the seed distribution. I added one more line for myself. On one side is retaining moisture for dry soil. On the other is keeping a framework for our home. Both require a schedule, a person responsible, and a written record. Do my part properly, and let the process run the rest. Saturday morning, I printed a few more cash flow summaries and repair orders, slipped them into thin folders, then drove Lily to the county fair. After a week of working with the court, the bank, and the co-op, I didn't want to argue in public. But the county fair is where things will reveal themselves without my having to say much. The farmers' market area sits next to the kids' rides, a row of tents selling pumpkins, honey, and grilled sausages. The organizers set up a small stage for farm introductions. I stood by the co-op's booth, looking over at the platform. Mason and his girlfriend Chloe had signed up to present the baby corn lot. The MC smiled, holding the mic. "Congratulations to you two. I hear there's a housewarming coming. When's the party?" Mason hesitated for half a second. Chloe took his hand, stepped forward, and said clearly, "When the paperwork is real paperwork." The whole area fell silent for a beat. The MC nodded and switched to the topic of crops. A few people murmured behind me. No one said names, but everyone understood what the answer was aimed at. Mason looked down at his hand, awkwardly rearranging the basket of corn. I didn't go closer. I wrote one line in my notebook. "The message is enough." At noon, I stopped by the farm credit booth to pick up more handouts on generational transfer plans. They were handing out a succession planning sheet written in very plain language. Make a clear will, consider a trust or a family LLC, assign signing authority, set rules for decision-making when an heir isn't yet qualified. The person staffing the booth reminded me the co-op had a special session that evening on ethics and ownership. I said I'd come. Before leaving, I gave Lily some cash for the Ferris wheel tickets, then sat on a wooden bench and checked Kelsey's email. She reported the court had received the petition. The schedule to consider the restraining order would be announced at the start of the week. Late afternoon, the co-op board opened an ethics and ownership session in the small hall next to the stadium. Chair Ray introduced the goals: reiterate proper steps for generational transfer, reduce dispute risk, and maintain relationships in the community. The summary minutes were projected on the screen. Part 1. The basic process for a succession plan, including asset assessment, scheduling a family meeting with a neutral party, writing a consensus memo, and updating records at the county. Part 2. Suggestions to use a trust or family LLC to separate ownership and operations, explicitly set dual signatures for major spending decisions, and publish a quarterly income-expense statement to stakeholders. Part 3. Minimum standards for any land transaction in the area, stressing in-person notarization, checking original IDs, and storing copies in a locked location. No line named any family. No one was criticized. But the entire room understood this was a lesson to prevent what had just happened. A representative from the county law office explained each item and answered questions about fees and timelines. I wrote down what I needed for the file: e-recording processing times, how to request system logs, how to place a dispute notice. The effect was immediate. Several heads of households started discussing holding a family meeting soon. An older farmer raised his hand. If the kids have been away for years but are still paying the taxes, where is their voice? The chair replied, in the minutes and on paper. Those who contribute get the right to view the books and sign on the relevant parts. The meeting ended with a vote to put the succession checklist on the co-op website and email it to all members. Cultural pressure is clearer than any rumor. Rules restated publicly, with signatures and a download link. On Sunday, the local church held a potluck. I brought a salad tray. Lily brought cookies. The pastor read a very short line before the meal. Let us be reminded of the commandment, "Thou shalt not bear false witness." He didn't preach long. He invited everyone to eat. I sat with the women's group at the back of the room. An auntie leaned in and whispered, "Avery is overdoing it. Family business dragged out into the marketplace." I set down my plate and spoke clearly and calmly. "I'm not overdoing it. I'm doing it right. I'm using process to tell the truth. I presented an in-house agreement first. No one signed." She frowned. "Why not let it slide this time so Mason can settle into a house?" I answered, "If there's no genuine signature, everything after will be a mess. If I let it slide, the farm violates debt covenants in 2 weeks. The bank will do its job. I'm keeping it right from the start so no one takes a bigger hit later." She fell silent and switched to asking Lily about school. I went back to my plate, served food, and said nothing more. A man at the next table turned and said briefly, "Paperwork first. Feelings later." I nodded. That afternoon, Mason posted an open letter on Facebook. The post was long, saying he was being misunderstood, that he was doing it for the family, that everything would be fine if we didn't make a big deal. He implied I wanted to keep everything, brought up my years working away from home. The post had no figures, no dates, no documents. An hour later, some relatives shared it and added emotional commentary. I didn't respond in the comments. I opened my laptop and drafted a single post on my personal page, set to public. It had 2 sections, a timeline and the 4-year expense ledger. I listed, in order, the day I started paying property tax, the day I signed crop insurance, the day I paid for equipment repairs, the day I requested records from the county, the day the notary left a voicemail, the day we received the system logs, the day the community meeting was held, the day I sent the in-house agreement and the 5 p.m. deadline, the day I sent the post-deadline voicemail, the day the court received the filing. Each line had a photo of a receipt or confirmation, amounts rounded, with account numbers and sensitive info redacted. The second section was a 4-year summary table. Taxes, insurance, maintenance, irrigation water. I ended the post with, "I won't argue. Please send any questions through counsel. I hope the family agrees to sign the in-house agreement so I can continue supporting in the proper way." After posting, I locked comments and left only the share button. I sent the link to Kelsey and asked her to archive screenshots. After a few hours, public opinion self-balanced. A few acquaintances confirmed they had seen me sign repair orders. Someone posted a photo of the co-op's email about the ethics and ownership session. Another reshared the succession checklist handout. The emotional comments tapered off. Some relatives deleted their shares of Mason's post or added, "waiting for the court's decision." I didn't message anyone privately. I took a walk with Lily around the neighborhood, talked about the coming school week and trying out for the basketball team. At the end of the day, I received a message from Chloe. "The line 'paperwork is real paperwork' goes for both sides. I want everything to be clear." I replied, "Thank you. I'm willing to sit with Mason at the lawyer's office, with a witness present to finalize what needs signatures." Chloe said she would tell him. I also received an email from the co-op with the official stamped minutes of the ethics and ownership session. I forwarded them to Kelsey and added them to the set I'll bring to court. Farm Credit sent more guidance on setting up a family LLC with basic templates. I saved it in the post-court options folder. Late at night, I reprinted a timeline and the 4-year expense table to submit in the morning. I checked my inbox and saw several people requesting the safe exit checklist I'd shared with friends. I sent a condensed version, the list of county records to request, how to obtain logs, how to contact the notary, a sample email for the bank, and how to record financial contributions within a family. I ended the day with one note. The county fair has posed the question, the co-op board has set the rules, the church has reminded us of the principle, and social media has received the figures. The rest is for the court to handle. I turned off the lights, set an early alarm, and prepared for the decisive week. Submit additional evidence, attend the hearing on the order, and, if the family agrees, sit down to write an in-house agreement with genuine signatures. On the morning before the session, Kelsey and I agreed to choose supervised mediation instead of dragging everyone into a crowded temporary hearing. Former Judge Elaine Porter was invited to facilitate. The meeting room was small, with one long table and enough chairs for the 4 members of my family and the attorneys on both sides. Elaine opened briefly. "No one wins here. Only the truth gets rebuilt here." The rules were clear. No talking about feelings, no taking credit, only discussing process and ownership. I presented the documents already submitted. Access logs, notary confirmation, the 30-day liquidity stress test, the co-op minutes, and the unsigned in-house agreement. Elaine asked in turn, who entered the system? When? With what permissions? Who signed which disbursements? Who signed the service orders? Every answer was recorded in the minutes by the clerk. The result of the first session was to maintain the temporary halt on the transaction, schedule the rollback of all county record changes to the state prior to the night of the 10th submission, and lock electronic access for all accounts not named on the documents. Elaine looked around the table. From here on out, whatever anyone does must leave a trail in accordance with the rules. No more verbal authorizations. In the second session, I presented a proposal for Mason. I made it clear this was not a bailout, but a framework to rectify and learn. 1. Mason registers 120 hours of seasonal labor with the co-op over 2 months, shadowing the field management and maintenance teams, learning to schedule, keep records, and respond to audits. 2. Mason temporarily freezes non-essential personal spending for 6 weeks. Any payment above a set threshold must be pre-approved by an independent advisor for 12 months. 3. All transactions related to the farm go through an attorney-managed escrow account, disbursed only with valid invoices. 4. Mason attends a financial skills class run by Farm Credit. When I finished, I stayed silent. Mason looked at Elaine, then at me, and asked, "Will someone help me set the schedule?" Elaine replied, "If you agree, the co-op will send the schedule. No one will do it for you, but you'll be guided to do it yourself." Mason nodded. For the first time in weeks, he didn't argue. After Mason's portion, it was my parents' turn. Kelsey produced a short document called an acknowledgement. It wasn't an admission of guilt before the law. It simply recorded that the 2 of them had acted against community standards by interfering with paperwork without written consent from the named party, and it pledged that they would not interfere with the LLC's operations and would not sign any documents related to the farm without proper legal authorization. My father read slowly. My mother looked at me and said softly, "Signing this feels like admitting fault." I replied, "This records reality and promises not to repeat it. It protects you both, because later, if asked, we have a paper to show." Elaine added, "No one will use this document to sue you if the timelines are met." By the end, my parents signed. I signed the portion, agree not to pursue further civil action. If all timelines were met and the access locks were made permanent, immediately after mediation, we started a 90-day compliance clock. Kelsey and I turned every necessary step into a week-by-week table. Week 1. Roll back county records to the state prior to the e-filing date. Retrieve all keys to the record storage. Change passwords for operating accounts. Enable two-factor authentication. Update the list of authorized signers. And file the latest dispute notice. Weeks 2 to 3. Redirect all invoices to the lawful address. Confirm the post office alert is in place. Lock all supply cards without a named responsible party. Update the list of insurance notification recipients. Week 4. A small internal audit of the 4 largest expenditures in the past 3 months. Produce a transparency report for the co-op, non-sensitive portions, and send an update to the bank. Weeks 5 to 8. Mason completes at least 80 hours of labor and submits confirmations with manager's signatures. My parents complete the transfer of all electronic access related to the LLC to the managing attorney. Weeks 9-12. Review beneficiaries on accounts. Update beneficiaries to the correct parties, and lock down any avenue for unauthorized changes. Each week we tick the boxes. Keys retrieved yet? Passwords changed yet? Beneficiaries updated yet? Reports sent yet? By week 12, every box was green. Elaine scheduled a final call, read through each item, and confirmed completed. When everything was back on track, I began to think about the farm's future. I didn't want to sell to run away. I wanted to divest deliberately, transparently, and keep what needed to be kept for the land. I worked with a reputable agricultural auctioneer, required a public process with advance notice, and vetted buyers for operating capability. In the contract, I added a conservation clause for 5 riverbank acres, banning construction and preserving trees and buffer zones against erosion. All terms were published with the sale packet. The auction ran smoothly. A qualified bidder won at a reasonable price and met the criteria. I closed, transferred according to schedule, paid all remaining obligations, and retained a portion of the proceeds to establish a fund. I moved to Seattle, took a part-time consulting role, and started the Prairie Forward Fund. The fund has 3 clear goals: scholarships for young farm households who want to learn financial management and succession planning, grants for drought-resistant drip irrigation models in Iowa's dry areas, and building a bridge between Iowa and East Africa to exchange farming methods under tough conditions. I registered the entity, opened accounts, and invited a small advisory board consisting of a longtime farmer, a teacher, and a co-op representative. I set an initial endowment from the farm sale and published quarterly income and expense reports. I sent the draft of the final installment to Kelsey to review the legal content, ensuring it didn't violate confidentiality or affect post-mediation commitments. She replied, "All good. No names beyond what's public. Sensitive details are redacted." I scheduled the release, then sat back at the dining table, looking at the completed 90-day checklist. Those green ticks weren't some grand victory. They were simply proof that I followed the right order. Mediation instead of mudslinging, conditional restoration, a clear acknowledgement in writing, and compliance to the end. I texted Mason one line: "When you finish the 120 hours, send the confirmation. If you need a recommendation letter for the finance class, I'll write it." He replied, "I'll finish this week." My mother sent a photo of my parents sitting in the kitchen, the calendar on the wall with the date of the final session with Elaine circled in red. My father wrote, "I understand now. Thank you for sticking with it." I only wrote back, "Keep signatures true, and everything will be fine." On the day the auction results and conservation terms were published, I sent a copy to the co-op and asked them to post it on the bulletin board. Chair A called, "The way you did this is the standard. People coming after will learn the right way." I thanked him and hung up. In Seattle, the weather was cool. I opened my laptop to the new funds site and added a download section, a template for the in-house agreement, a 30-day cash flow stress test checklist, and instructions for requesting record logs. I believe those simple files will help another family avoid the tangle I just went through. And when someone is torn between kinship and finances, they'll have a file set to start a clear conversation. No shouting needed. Just genuine signatures and a schedule that runs on time. Everything closed neatly, without noise, in the right order, selling under clear conditions, retaining the conservation land, publishing the fund's income and expense reports quarterly, and the moving house after the old matters were fully settled. I drew a few things I want to state clearly, briefly, and directly. Kinship needs boundaries. Without boundaries, people easily confuse requests with entitlements. Trust grows from transparency. Without transparency, the family story will wear down over time from suspicion. Help means asking first, agreeing in writing, and recording the right person and the right amount. Do it differently and call it by its proper name: violation. And if you have to stand between two choices, respecting yourself or indulging your family, choose the one that means you won't have to talk in circles to yourself when you look in the mirror. I know many people are stuck in the overlap between affection and money. Thank you for following to the end of this journey, for taking the time to listen to each dry but necessary detail. Your patience is the motivation for me to make things clear instead of dramatic. If this story is useful, please save it so you can use it as a framework when needed. Send it to someone you trust and tell them there is a calmer way to do things. Thank you for listening.